said, an art tour, and I'm like, I don't feel like I'm qualified for art. So, for those of you who don't know, I'm an architect, and so, my in my work, I think it was, get involved in a lot of different things. Master of none, however that saying goes. So as an architect, deal with a lot of real technical stuff, but engineers are always better at the technical stuff than architects are. We deal with art in a way, but real artists are really better than me at art, all that type of thing. The one probably piece that really specific to architecture, which is maybe hard to understand, is the thing that's really specific to us is we create volumes and spaces that people live in, socialize in, function in, that type of thing. You make a building more than just the first thing of a building is got to protect you from the elements and that type of thing. But then after that, it's all the kind of inner workings of how we and functionally within buildings. So I have a kind of a long. I don't have expertise, so I'm going to be engaging in a lot of and rampant speculation. So I'll just share some of my thoughts. Just give you a little history from what I know, kind of the hearsay part. I grew up in the church and been pretty much all my life. And I remember when I was in junior high and into high school when this building was designed and then built. And Bob DeVoe, who was the architect, Bob was a local architect here in Cedar Falls and did a lot of different buildings over the years. And I remember, and this was the time when this was happening, going to meetings at the church and hearing what was going on. And this was the time when I was kind of deciding I was going to become an architect. And so to kind of see what went on there, and I have some recollections about the design and what happened there. And other people may have different recollections or better information. But then over the years, when I got out of school, I worked in California for a few years, and I was in Oregon in graduate school and things. And then I came back and started working here and been here since. And the firm I joined was Flynn, Sado, Anderson, and DeVoe. And at that point, Bob had retired essentially, and so his name was on the wall. But he had merged his practice in with Flynn, Sado, Anderson, which was primarily Darrell Anderson at that time. And so Bob would come and hang around the office once in a while, have coffee, see what we were up to. But he wasn't really practicing doing much at that time. Ironically, I never really talked to him about this building. And so, probably could have gleaned a whole lot of information about what the intentions were and things like that. But this will be more fun. We can just speculate on what might have been and go from there. So, so Noah's got up. So one of the things that I did what was kind of interesting, I thought I'd just try to see if there was any tie-ins with, this is a Danish heritage church, and one of the things I did when I finished up in graduate school was I conceived of this whole elaborate trip to Europe to do some studying and did a little project, and and involved with that was looking at Danish churches and comparing them with like these cathedrals in Italy from a design standpoint, which was, anyways, so this is my own piece of art. This is a pencil drawing I did of a typical church in, call them country churches or that type of thing. The bigger cities will have more traditional European type churches, cathedrals and things like that. But these churches were done from about 1000 AD to 1200, and they're just all over the place. And they all have similar characteristics. And they're simple in a way, but they're very, very attractive. I don't know. And they all have, you can see they have cemeteries around them. And so there's a lot of history there. And so I was trying to figure out, was there any kind of inspiration that, might have come from that? And other than it's kind of three-part design. You can see the steeple and the other parts, that's pretty typical. One of the things you kind of learn as a designer is, 3 is better than 2, things like this, kind of little cheat things for composing elements and that type of thing. So, Danes, Christianity didn't hit till about 1000 or there. In fact, the first church in Denmark was 860 in Ribe, which I've been to, and on my trip, because I had relatives there family relatives that I stayed with. Unfortunately, when I went on my little European jaunt, when I was there for 3 months, I had a really nice camera, and about a week or 2 into the trip, when I was still in England, where I landed, got the camera, thought it was working. I took 22 rolls of 30-some, whatever it is, shots, and only the first roll and a half were any good. So I don't have any of those pictures. They were kind of, otherwise I would show you a whole bunch of photos of the churches I looked at and all that good stuff. But, so this is kind of the history where the church comes from. And if you could get the next one. This is a picture I pulled off the internet, one you can see with a little bit more elaborate things, but they all have this very similar characteristic. If you want to go to the next. This, though, is kind of what, Scandinavians are known for. Scandinavian design. It's kind of a modern design, but where I think Scandinavian design kind of varies from others is it's a little warmer. I love a lot of the Danish furniture and utensils and things like that. They're very clean, but they have a little bit more character than some of the really modern stuff, which can be really hard edge and cold in a way. So this is a Grundtvig church, named after the famous philosopher and kind of inspiration within the Lutheran Church. This is completed in 1940. You can see it's, they went from a very traditional kind of neoclassical type buildings and things like that for big churches to this, more modern kind of look. And this is a pretty famous, probably the most famous church in Denmark. We get the next one. That's the interior. Very, it's really a cathedral. It's really pretty dramatic and all that type of thing. If you want to go to the next. So Glenn sent me a little something. So I had to refute his thoughts on this, or where they came from. Not really. So this is what they're called stave churches, and they are primarily in Norway. And not Denmark, because what I showed you was kind of a typical Danish church. The interesting thought that was floated was, you look at this space here and you kind of look at that form and you go, oh, maybe they did. So, I would have had to talk to Bob DeVoe and see if he was inspired by any of that. But, that seems really wrong to be using the Norwegians as an inspiration for a Danish church. So, I don't know. Anyway, that's just some thoughts on kind of, the history behind the Danes and what may have been. But what I find interesting about this church, if you look at that 3-part thing I was thinking about, you've got this big volume here, which you see. You've got the classroom edition, which kind of looks like a separate volume, and you've got the fellowship hall. So you've got that kind of 3-part thing going on here. And whether, probably not intentional, it just kind of happens that way. But that's kind of how you start looking at things that don't look like they connect and make these weird connections with us. Architects like to spend a lot of time contemplating. Some of the things about this church that I think are interesting is, just the construction. We work so hard to try to make things economical, and even today, 40 years later, this starts to become a hard church maybe to build, just because some of the things are pretty nice, like the structure here, the glue lambs, which is the big wood beams that support this whole thing. They're actually an engineered lumber. It's not one piece of wood. If you didn't know, it's made up of a whole bunch of slats of wood that are all pieced together and glued, and so they can engineer the weight, the strength of that glue lam. But I would call it a premium product. It's not going to be cheap to do that type of thing. And then, having the wood ceilings in here, that's really, really pretty nice. And so, one of the things that you think about when you're designing things is hierarchy. And so what is the most important piece of a church? And, I would have to say the sanctuary is, right? The worship space. So if you look at this space, it has all the premium materials in it that the rest of the building does not. You've got the brick walls in here. Usually brick's not used in the interior that much. It's fairly expensive again. All the wood, that type of thing, the glue lams, all those pieces that, and obviously like the stained glass windows and things like that, you don't put the stained glass in the sanctuary, you don't put it in the classrooms or the other spaces. So, that's kind of a design feature that I always find attractive about this, about this building and space. Bob DeVoe, I was kind of looking, I have all of his archive. In fact, the church is going to be getting it, since I sold out my interest in the architectural practice here back in November, and we're now owned by a firm out of Milwaukee, so I'm part of a much bigger organization, so I'm kind of semi-retired, and the new owners don't really care to keep our archives we've got from Cedar and DeVoe and these guys. So I went down there this week and I grabbed all the original drawings for the building, as well, anything I could find. One thing I couldn't find, which I thought would have been interesting, is I remember when this was being designed that Bob DeVoe had done some nice renderings, and I think I've seen him in my office at one time or another, but we did some house cleaning or whatever, and I can't find it, but he did some really, really nice kind of drawings that, like on illustration board with colored pencil and things like that, which were, just really, there's a certain style which I think is really interesting. Every architect, kind of has their own personal styles and things like that they do. And unfortunately, I could not find any of that. But I also remember kind of design decisions that were made during that period. And one of them was they had which I always thought was interesting, which unfortunately didn't come to fruition. There was an option to do a chapel on the building, and it would have been right at this entrance over here by the office, kind of diagonally off there. I remember the scheme, and they had a nice rendering of it, and I don't know, it was kind of maybe octagon shaped or something like that, but to have a separate chapel would have been quite interesting. So that was one thing that didn't come to fruition. One that did is the basement classrooms. I remember those. Originally, I remember the design was all single, no basement. It was slab on grade for everything. And then somebody said, well, it's really cost effective, pretty cheap to build basement space, which is true and not true. But anyways, that's why we have the, kind of the basement under a portion of it. So, those were things that happened during the design process that were kind of interesting as well. Now if you can keep going here, Noah, let's see what we got next one. That's some more of the stave churches. One more. So, yeah, you can kind of see there on the top of that drawing, this is some of the building sections and things like that for the building. But it, when you design a church, if you're driving down the street, most churches you drive by, and I don't have to tell you it's a church, right? You can probably look at it and say, oh, what kind of building is that? Well, that's a church. This building is still identifiable as a church, I think. Although, it's not a real super traditional church, it's very modern. I think, Bob did a lot of, he's generally fairly modern designer. He did banks, he did schools, he did, things, and they were all pretty modern of the day. You know, the 60s and 70s. A lot of buildings you would see had a certain style, and he was probably with that realm most of the time. But you know, the thing that kind of tells you, it gives you the cue that this is a church, is the steeple portion on the building, right? You got the volume, which is important, but then that in conjunction with the steeple, I think, kind of tells you that, hey, this is a church. And so, you know, even though it's a fairly modern one in design, let's see. I'll roll through a couple more. These are scans of the original construction drawings, since I don't have any of the design stuff. And in fact, I have the original design drawings, or the construction drawings here, the originals. I pulled those out, and hopefully we can keep them at the church and they won't get destroyed or that type of thing. But if anybody wants to look at them afterwards, one thing that's kind of interesting that I think, you know, even though the construction drawings are mechanical drawings, that type of thing, you know, every architect kind of has their own style, even when it comes to construction drawings. I mean, I can go back and pull out an old set of drawings in our office, and I can't, you know, over 30 or 40 years, you know, I've done a lot of drawings. Don't remember all of them, but I can look at a drawing and go, oh yeah, I did that drawing, you know. Or I can look at it and say, oh yeah, that was Steve, you know. Everybody's drafting style has some variation, even though we, you know, all are kind of trained to do it exactly the same way, in a way. So Bob's got, you know, drawings are kind of, to me, they're fun to look at. They're interesting, that type of thing. So that's something that, if anybody wants to look at that, I do have those. Can you go another one, Noah? Yeah. So there's the steeple. You can see the kind of the steeple detail right there on the drawing, and how it projects and kind of gives that image of a church. Some of the things that's interesting, and one of the things we always try to solve as an architect is how things function, you know. And one thing that didn't function so well in this building is, in my mind, is that's the front door there on the side, right? And how many of you came in the front door today? Maybe one or two of you. You know, most people, because the parking lot is straight back to the east, everybody comes into the fellowship hall, walks through the fellowship hall on the way here. And you can see on the original design, there was no vestibule there. It was just a set of doors, came straight into the fellowship hall, which wasn't the best of things. And then, you know, at some point, we wanted some more classrooms and this and that. And we ended up with that addition on the back, which added a couple of classrooms and the vestibule and that type of thing, which was a marked improvement, I think, you know, in the functioning of the building. So our job is we try to solve all those things as architects when we create a building, but that doesn't always happen. So, you know, they're never perfect, and they always need some tweaking over the years as either things like that are discovered or times change and the needs change. So buildings need to, you know, to be able to evolve with that. Some of the other things of note, well, and we've had, you know, quite a few different little tweaks over the years to the building. And one thing, if anybody knows, I wasn't involved with when they did that addition, that entry addition. That was Grimes Port, that group. And I don't know if anybody knows if we have drawings for that. That'd be really nice to have for our archive. I always like to keep those things. They're very useful for future iterations of the building. Another design feature that was interesting to me, that's like worked somewhat, but it's probably never been realized its full usefulness, is the movable back wall here between that and the narthex, and then also the same thing from the fellowship hall to the narthex. You know, in theory, when the church moved here, it was, you know, because the church was growing, could grow, needed more capacity, you know, that type of thing. And so, you know, one of the thoughts has been, you know, with that movable walls, you can open this up to get additional space without building new space, right? Which has been pretty useful at times, primarily like Christmas. It opened up and a lot of chairs sat back there, and all of a sudden we could handle the volume of people. But but in terms of the fellowship hall and opening the whole thing up, it hasn't been used a great deal either. So, that's one of those. It's like sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're kind of halfway in between, which I think is kind of the case with that element. Let's see what else. Otherwise, I don't want to trump anybody else's little things. My 15 minutes, anyways, Glenn, right? But those are just kind of some thoughts on the building design and functionality and things like that. So, if anybody's got a quick question, I'd be happy. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Anne Marie. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Anne Marie, and they asked me to talk about our beloved ship. And I have to admit that I needed to go back and do some research, which is the first thing I did, and I started reading about the ships, and I realized how wrong I was. So I thought that the ship represented our ancestors who came over, and that when we came to church, then we would remember them and recognize them and keep them in our hearts. But that is totally wrong, absolutely totally wrong. So if you're like me, I'll give you a little history lesson first. The history of the ships hanging in buildings predates Christianity. And in the old times back then, they put the ships to assure a safe passage, as we would consider it a magic or whatever god they used. And a safe passage for the ship and its crew, because if you got the crew back, that was the best option. If you got the ship back, that was a good option. If you got both back, that was just perfect. So the boats have been there for more years than there have been Christians, which is kind of interesting. But as Jesus came on, that sort of magic symbol disappeared, and the churches adopted this, particularly the Catholic Church, and then of course the Lutheran Church, adopted these to signify that that is us. That is us. We're the crew in the ship, and we are piloted by Jesus, and we're all in this together. And I thought that was just wonderful. This ship has several flags on it, and it's not meant to be a disservice to Norwegians or Swedish, but we were all Danish to begin with, and so all of these churches started out to be Danish, and then they have merged. So the Danish flag and the U.S. flag fly predominantly on the ship. So the ship is the church as a refuge, the Christian life as a journey, and the role of Christ as pilot through the storms of life. Our beloved ship, yes, we have a picture, good. Our beloved ship hangs proudly here with us, and it is from our church. It is from our church family, which makes it even more special. Soren Madsen had this in his heart, that he wanted to build a ship for our church, and he researched it, picked a clipper ship, which is some of the largest and fastest ships at the time. He got the plans and all of the things he needed to build it. It took him 3 years to build it, which is a long time. And as I knew I was doing this, I started trying to peek up over the sides. And if you can look at the sides, can we go to the side view? You can see more of the railings and the intricate work that was done on it. He also said in his writings that the worst part of it was the riggings, and it almost got thrown out several times while he was trying to do that. So it was modeled after a ship that sailed under the Danish flag, and it still does. No insult, should be a Scandinavian flag, but that's another whole topic. He didn't share the information that he was building this until it was about done. And the ladies in the church had already started trying to plan how to buy a ship, not realizing he was doing it. It was hung in the nave in 1946, which makes it almost 90 years old, which is amazing. It is 42 inches long. It has 4 masts with 6 yard arms. And the other interesting thing is his son, Harold, when we built the new church, they took it down, and Harold refurbished it. It had to have all new riggings, which he also said was the worst part of the whole thing, and brought it back and hung it in the church. And we know that Diane Kessner is Harold's daughter, so we still have the family heritage here. When I was researching this, I found a quote from Anne Gratha Krogh Nielsen, no relation to me, even though we're both Ann Nielsen. And this is what it says: when we are seated here Sunday after Sunday in the main sanctuary that we fondly call the ship or nave, we are on board a ship. We are moving, we have a goal, and we are trying to reach it. The ocean can be calm and breathtakingly beautiful, or it can be furiously dangerous. We need our captain, we need our golden hope, we need our ship to sail these waters. Thank you to the Madsen family for this gift. It is a reminder we are all in the same boat with our captain, Jesus, every week. It is a beloved treasure. Thanks.
Okay. Hello. I'm Andrea Kettle, and I was tasked with sharing a bit about our stained glass windows. So I'm a teacher, and I basically put everything on slides like I tell my students not to. However, still. Okay, so just for a little overview, 3 words that I would use, 3 adjectives to describe our windows, I would say would be beautiful, contemporary, and symbolic. And referencing what Marty mentioned about like valuable pieces that we've saved for the sanctuary, just a little fact that our 4, I'm only going to talk about 2 sets today, but our 4 sets of stained glass windows in 1979, when the church had opened for its first service, the windows were $7,900. And I did a little research. The United States Bureau of Labor and Statistics said that today, those same sets of windows would be roughly $34,721. So definitely valuable, beautiful pieces. And like I said, we have 4 different sets, and each set of 3 is meant to read as one piece. And as far as the way that the windows are constructed, we have I'm not an expert on stained glass windows by any means, but I did a little bit of research, and I also looked in the books in our history room. But 2 main types of stained glass windows would be like traditional ones, and then these are called faceted, or this is French, but dalle de verre, which ours are faceted or dalle. And a traditional stained glass window would be made of very thin pieces of colored glass that are cut and shaped and joined together with lead strips and soldered. And oftentimes you will see actual like Bible scenes that are depicted in those stained glass windows, more lifelike. However, ours are, and again, building off of what Marty had mentioned about the modern design of our church, they would be described as more abstract and contemporary. And the construction of these dalle, D-A-L-L-E, windows, it's up there, they involve larger, thicker pieces of glass that are shaped using saws, wet saws, and hammers, and then they are set into epoxy. Yeah. As far as the symbolism in general goes, these windows are cut from many different angles, so they have many different surfaces and facets. And funny enough, today, when I came in, Glenn said, "I really wish it would be sunny for you today, but that's okay." But one of the pieces of info that I read in one of our history books was that these windows are meant to collect light, even on cloudy days, and project it into the sanctuary in many different shades and colors. And actually, as far as the symbolism goes, the different colors with their various hues and intensities of light remind us of the family of God that is made up of all kinds of different people. So yeah, even, I don't know what it's like outside right now, but they still look pretty bright to me. Okay, and then today I'm only going to talk about 2 sets of windows. So for our second part of our art tour, I'll talk about the other 2. But the south window, I feel like a Bible verse that would nicely accompany this window over here would be, "The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined." And you can see first these windows actually on the south side represent the incarnation, or the act of the coming of God's only Son into the world and becoming flesh. The large dark area symbolizes the darkness of evil, sin, suffering, and death. And then you can see kind of in the sort of coming from the upper left down to the center, a funnel of light that represents the coming of Jesus as the light into the world and giving people hope. And that our goal, while we are also in flesh, is to live in the service of God. And then the other windows would be the north windows. I have those right? Okay, the north windows symbolize the resurrection. And a Bible verse that I have is, "Because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus from the dead will also raise us with Jesus and present us with you to himself." This helps to reinforce the promise of resurrection and give hope for eternal life. And if you look at the windows, there's like a swirling section of light right in the middle. And then all around again is darkness. So swirling sections of light in the vortex of death into which life is inevitably drawn. But out of death, a great shaft of light moves upward and onward as a symbol of new life given to us in the resurrection.
All right, my name is Elaine Brown, and I feel like as a new member, I've learned a lot already today that I didn't know. When Kathy Cessna called me to ask if I would participate in this, at first I told her, she said, "What do you want to talk about?" And I said I didn't care. And then I told her later, "I want to talk about the altar." And the reason I want to talk about the altar is, I didn't tell her this at the time, is my dad, Don Brown, was the first man to serve on the altar guild. And other men had done it, like their wife was on the altar guild and they helped. He's the first man, I've been told, to sign up to serve on it himself. And I thought, I'm going to do this for him. This would be a good thing to talk about. So if we could show the picture of the altar itself. I don't know if you realize, and the pastor who was with us today talked about it a little bit. We have a very unique altar at Bethlehem. In most churches, you go up to communion to a rail, and you're only on one side of the altar. You're facing forward. But here we have a true table with with railings all around it. This brings a sense of community during communion. We are all part of God's family. We're part of the community of believers. And also being physically close to the altar helps us feel closer to God. That's very rare in churches, and it's so special. Also, I read that the semicircle arrangement also echoes the concept of being part of the family of God, with everyone having a feeling of togetherness and closeness. You can still see the people over there, no matter where you're sitting. Otherwise, sometimes when people always sit in the front and people sit in the back, you don't even see the people in the back. But here it's more of a circular or semicircle arrangement. And the altar itself has a natural appearance with simplistic beauty, which speaks to us of God's creative power in nature. It has lighter colored wood with simple, clean lines, and that's a hallmark of Scandinavian design. Then we're going to talk about the paraments, these pieces of material. Paraments are decorative cloth hangings. They serve as a visual reminder of the Christian story and the seasons in the church year. The paraments we use now were made under the supervision of Pastor Chafee and the altar guild that was serving at the time this church was built. The parament that we're using right now is this purple one for Lent. And I think we have, there you go, thank you. It has 3 bars for the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and it has a crown on it. And some churches at this time of year have a crown of thorns, but it said here, this kind of crown is as Christ the King. He went through, Jesus went through the hardships on earth. Now he's in heaven serving as our King. That's why they have more of a regular crown. There is a blue parament. I think we have or we can do, I don't care which one. Okay, a blue one, there you go, that we do for Advent, and it has a plant on it. And Lisa and I were talking, and we said it, well, we think it means it symbolizes new life. And then we found out it's based on the scripture Isaiah 11:1, and that says, a fruit will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. And that's the idea behind the symbol on there. The Messiah is the fruit. God promised a descendant of David would rule forever. And that's the thinking behind that symbol, which is showing new life too. But that's why they do it during Advent when Jesus was born. There's a red parament for Pentecost, and it has a dove on it, symbolizing the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit appeared as a dove during Jesus' baptism. So that's why they have that symbol. We did the purple, we did the blue. There is a white parament for Easter with a cross on it. Yep, there you can. And again, it's got the 3 bars for the Holy Trinity. And then there's a green parament, which is used the rest of the year with a triangle symbolizing the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then we heard that Kai Markison, who's a longtime member here who participates online, he remembers being taught about the symbols on these paraments when he was in confirmation class with Pastor Chafee years ago. We found out these paraments were made for Bethlehem around the time this church was built by a woman named Teddy Finnegan. She got her master's degree in art at UNI, and she was trained by artists from Sweden. She later taught in the art department at UNI. She wove the cloth herself out of linen and wool. Her husband, Don Finnegan, he designed the symbols on the cloth. He was a professor of art at UNI. And then this same woman, Teddy, made the paraments for several other area churches also. Several current members of Bethlehem have told me they knew Teddy. My mom knew her too. She passed away in 2021 at the age of 94, but she has kids and grandkids and great-grandkids who still live in this area. And I hope, it'd be neat if they could go around and show the grandkids and great-grandkids all the different things that she's made in the various churches. Okay, then we're going to talk about the cross above the altar there. The wooden cross above the altar was handmade by a member of Bethlehem named Elmer Larson. Elmer made the cross in memory of another Bethlehem member, Harold Matson. Harold is actually the grandpa of one of our current members, Diane Kessner. So special for her to get to see that every week. And then I think we have a picture of our sand, the cross, there we go. I'm going to talk about the sand cross. This special cross is brought out on All Saints' Day and placed in front of the altar. Interim Pastor Audrey got the idea for this cross from a congregation that she had formerly served at. Longtime Bethlehem member Reed Honeymuller built the cross himself using his design and carpentry skills to make it fit perfectly into our Scandinavian simplicity and woodwork. And he's made so many things around the church that I've heard about. He filled the cross with sand so candles could stand up. This special cross is made for people to come up themselves and light candles in memory of loved ones who have died. Like our regular altar, this builds community by having people approach the cross together and feel close to God by being close to the altar. Pastor Audrey liked this special cross so much, she had Reed make her another one for another congregation after she left here. So we have a lot of things we're lucky that he can make for us. We wanted to find out more about the communion ware, like the silver, it's not up there right now, but the silver things that hold the communion cups and the chalice, but we couldn't find anybody that knew. They think the silver things came from the old church, but no one seems to know where, like the pottery chalice he holds in the little plates, where they came from. So if anybody knows, let us know. A guess was that maybe they were bought with memorial money, the pottery ones at one time, but that's all I have.